Okay, thank you all for coming. How's the sound? It sounds pretty loud out there. Okay, that's better, thanks. Welcome everybody. I'm so happy to be here in the lovely city called Ojai. My name is Felice. I'm a naturopathic clinician. I really think of myself as a bulk herbalist. And today we are going to talk about the endocannabinoid system. So, excuse me one second, I have some written notes that I'm going to access here as well. We're having a little technical difficulty with the presentation. You're going to hear me say the word ocean a lot today. And I apologize for that because I'm trying to get across an idea that is a little abstract. And so this is the first time I'm presenting it. So that should spark your curiosity. But another thing that I'd like to say is that I've learned so much here already. I've only really attended just a small part of the lectures. And I'd like to just say that as herbalists, one of our most powerful tools as a community is the oral tradition. Because we can do a lot of science, and that is a beautiful, wonderful thing. But connecting the dots is really something that we get a lot of learning and knowledge from when we speak with other people, both who know a lot more than us, and then there's the concept of medicine, learn, do, teach. So sharing what you know is also a wonderful way to learn. This group is probably very familiar with why plants make molecules. We're going to only talk about two molecules in depth today that the cannabis plant makes. One is called CBD. Many of you here know a little bit about that. When I first started giving talks, nobody in the room knew what CBD was. But everybody, a lot of people knew what THC was. Who here knows what THC is? Okay. We are going to be really not emphasizing those a lot today. But the plant makes these molecules to protect itself. When the early pioneers were in the colonies, they were told to, it was by law, they had to plant hemp seeds. And what they realized, if you plant hemp in and around a pond, all the fish die. And it's not because the hemp is toxic to the fish, it's because it's toxic to the algae. The algae dies, and then fish don't have food source. So there is a very specific reason why plants make molecules to interact with the physiology of other organisms. Another thing to pay attention to, which I'm sure you likely have not heard, is pay attention to the biology of connective tissue. Even if you don't know what that is, we're going to kind of go through a little primer on that. But connective tissue is essentially the tissue that connects. So when life was being formed 600 million years ago, Ojai was underwater, the whole planet was underwater, and there were only single-celled organisms. When they got together to form bodies, they had to have an interface. That interface is called connective tissue, also known as interstitium. And if you Google connective tissue as an organ, you'll see that very large publications like the Journal of Science and Nature, we now consider this to be a new proper organ system similar to the cardiovascular system, nervous system, etc. So a huge part, and because of that, I like to refer to this system as like the internet of the body, and I'm going to give you some visuals to kind of help tie that together. And this system is really about communication and connection. Hence the word connective tissue, and on multiple levels, so I'm looking forward to sharing that with you. And we're going to also talk about this concept of homeostasis, which has been a theme running through the weekend. I really like to meander through my slides, but we don't have a whole lot of time today. So I'm kind of torn between wanting to have Q&A at the end versus getting through all of the material, so we'll see what happens. But if you could hold your questions till the end, that would be wonderful. So course objectives have been in the flyers and in the publications. And I just want to chat a little bit about the plant, I'm a whole plant guy, and this whole plant has a lot to offer humanity, not just in terms of medicine, but also in terms of food, and I mean food for humans and food for animals. It also has industrial applications. You can make and run biodiesel from hemp seed, and the plant, the seed itself, is a perfect amino acid profile, has all of the essential amino acids, and the lipids are in an ideal 3.75 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio, which means it's ideal for inflammatory condition or anti-inflammatory effects. This plant has been with humanity for a long, long time. In every single place where it has grown, the local people have used it for food and used it for medicine. Some native cultures refer to it as the green buffalo because, like the buffalo, was able to provide for so many needs, food, clothing, raw materials, etc. The plant does the same thing as well. And in every language, in every area that it's grown, they have a word for it. It used to be available throughout all of the states and pharmacies everywhere in the early part of the 20th century, and millions of prescriptions were written for it every year. This is one of the reasons why I like it. This is an example of correlation, not causality, but every state that gets a new cannabis law sees a similar phenomenon where we have, this is from the state of Colorado, from the year 2000 to 2014, we see raising rates of opiate overdose, and with the advent of legalization, there is a downturn. The correlation runs a lot deeper than that, and it becomes very interesting, so I'm happy to take Q&A at the end if you have thoughts on this. But my point in bringing this up is that it has potential not only just to help us as individuals, but to help our culture as well. I like this slide. I call this the wheel of synergy. And I will be needing my notes on some of this, but you will see here, these are elucidated biochemical pathways that the plant possesses. The blue on top is CBD. CBD alone lands on over 100 different, or works on over 100 different biochemical pathways. There's just about a dozen or so shown here. And the little green sliver at about 8 o'clock is THC. THC has some useful properties, and is really especially useful, I think, for most folks at very low doses. Some folks, in rare circumstances, require high doses. And I want to introduce this concept called network biology. If you Google the slide up at the top right, that's from the Journal of Nature in 2008. Network pharmacology, the next paradigm in drug discovery. We have, in the 21st century here, this notion of the one drug, one target model of pharmacology, and it has achieved great success. But when we look at complex neurodegenerative diseases, when we look at cancer, it does have its limitations, and that's why we see in modern medicine and modern pharmacology this approach, especially you're probably more familiar with cancer therapy, for using multiple medications, cocktails they're heard, to address more than one pathway. So diseases such as cancer and neurodegenerative diseases are increasingly related to interactions between networks of multiple pathways, genes, and functional proteins. And it's the robustness of the biologic networks, it's the health of the network that really allows the biology to withstand disturbances both from the external environment and from internal disturbances. And if a disease alters this complex equilibrium of physiology, the recovery of that balance or equilibrium is a promising venue for clinical research. And in any period of quick change, if there is any instability in the body structure, it's on display, and a healthy body is resistant to change. Lots of mechanisms of CBD. I refer to it as kind of the endocannabinoid system as kind of like the internet of the body. And what I mean by that is it's a body-wide communication system. One of the things that CBD can do is it can increase the body's own endocannabinoid molecules. So the body, we make these molecules to run this system. It can be influenced by the plant molecules as well. CBD lands on serotonin receptors, which can be helpful for anxiety, pain, and sleep. But then there's another receptor down below, also for pain and inflammation, the TRPV1 receptor. The V stands for vanilla. So another concept of a plant teaching us about a biochemical pathway. If we hadn't used vanilla for headache, we would have likely not used it as a probe to find this receptor system. Also, other anxiety, you see anxiety through the serotonin receptors. Similarly, anti-anxiety and improved cardiac function through adenosine receptors. Caffeine runs on the adenosine receptor, and very good, especially for folks who don't use it a lot, to increase exercise performance. Increased bone density, lots of studies on cancer proliferation, and one of my favorites, neuroprotection. I wish we had more time today, but we don't. There is evidence of broad-ranging effects, and we need more studies. There's been limitation in the research due to laws, which are still slow to change here in the US. But of all the plants ever studied in terms of peer-reviewed literature on the medical side or on the botanical side, there might only be one where we have more science than cannabis, and that would be garlic. But other than that, we have more science on this plant than just about any other botanical in the entire plant. And there is some degree of evidence for conditions. I'm not really going to be focusing on conditions today. I'm going to be focusing on homeostasis in the network. But you'll see all of these have a degree of clinical validation. Those in green have a little bit higher level of evidence, and those that are bolded in green have the highest level of evidence. The endocannabinoid system consists of endocannabinoid molecules. These are molecules that our body makes that helps run it, as well as cannabinoid receptors, and the enzymes that synthesize and degrade endocannabinoids. That's where a lot of modern pharmacology is looking for new drug development right now. It is the most dense receptor system in the human nervous system. We're going to go into a little bit of receptor dynamics in a bit. Basically, a receptor receives information from outside of the cell, takes it into the cell, and the cell is able to perform functions based on that information. So this is a 600 million year old system. It functions as a self-regulating adaptation and harm reduction system, and influences multiple physiologic processes in the human body and in almost all other animals. There's a saying in biology that ontology recapitulates phylogeny. Has anyone ever heard of that? Great, great. Basically what it means is that the evolutionary development of life is mimicked in the embryologic process. So at a certain point in time, all of us in our embryologic development, we all had gills. We all had gills in our necks. The scalene muscles were gills. So this system has been hardwired in from the very beginning of the formation of bodies. And the first tissue, there are 4 major types of tissue. The first tissue formed evolutionarily is connective tissue. It allows the interface between cells. We're going to look at some primitive drawings of this here in a second. So what in the world is a body good for anyway? I mean, we can write poetry and we can cook and make love and do all these beautiful things, but from an evolutionary perspective, and it's a rhetorical question, I wish I had more time to engage with you guys. Part of what's really great about having a body is we live in this chaotic world and need to have an internal stability. So a larger organism can give that life form an ability to withstand change to a better degree than just a single tiny cell. So we have to maintain a steady state inside of our physiology. We have to maintain our, for example, as mammals, we need to maintain our body temperature within a certain range. It doesn't matter if it's hot in Ojai or if it's cold in North Dakota, we need to maintain a steady state. Originally, biologic organisms 600 million years ago got a lot of their molecules, their food source from the ocean water. But cells inside of the body don't have that option. So we have to, as life forms, we've had to bring that inside. And I like to use the analogy of a brick wall because it gives a good two-dimensional picture to kind of get this concept of connective tissue across. If you see the brick wall, the bricks would represent the cells, and the mortar represents the connective tissue. And why is this important? Because this is the network that this whole system runs on. And you can see that if you take the brick on the top left and the brick on the lower right, you can run a bunch of different pathways down through the mortar so that the cells, the mortar is in communication. And so we have literally brought the ocean inside of us. We no longer have tides, but we have waves and we have rhythms. And if you taste your blood, it has the same saline concentration as seawater. I just want to emphasize that this system has been designated as an organ system. And sometimes I'll use the word connective tissue, sometimes I'll use the word interstitial space. That just means the space between cells. It's the primary source of lymphatic fluid. It's the major water compartment in the body, and it's where inflammatory cascades and neurotransmission occur. The synapse between nerve cells is actually connective tissue space. It's that ocean, it's that mortar inside of us. Previously, we thought that it was simply an inert layer that divided sections of the body, but we've recently found in the neocortex of the brain lymphatic channels, which were identified using multiphoton microscopy imaging. And so we have a whole different concept of what this system is about. So we're going to tie this all together, but there are basically 4 problems that were solved that had to be solved by bodies in order for us to get here today, from a single cell to the formation of the bodies. Bodies face physiologic challenges that single cells don't. Bodies need to distribute food and energy to various tissues so that cells far from the food source can receive nutrients and eliminate waste. So we bring that ocean inside of us. A body must develop through stages. We call this embryogenesis. And our embryonic cells, including stem cells, are directed to move and morph into various types of tissues and organs as they grow. Bodies also have another problem. We need to cope with injury or disease, and damaged cells need to signal other parts of the body that they are in need of help. Similarly, a body must be able to respond to these damaged cells with biochemical resources needed to heal or replace them. So first we need to know there's a problem, then we need to do something about it. And bodies therefore need ways of monitoring changes within and also to interpret changes in the environment and respond accordingly. And the endocannabinoid system directs all of these processes, and it's able to do this because it's been hardwired in from the very beginning. Evolution, so it's an evolutionarily preserved health preservation system. Things that last a long time in biology tend to be very well designed. I typically think of cockroaches and sharks about things that are well designed, but this system is far, far older than that. And for the primitive single-celled organism, seawater was the primary exchange system. But in us and in multicellular organisms, the ion composition of the extracellular space corresponds to the seawater. It's hard to find good pictures of this. I found a few. Here's one of them. You'll see on the upper right the red and the lower left the blue. This is a capillary bed with various cells in there. And hopefully you can kind of get the picture that if you look at the white space with the dots, there's a lot of water in there, and a lot of exchange is happening in here, but that the cells, to a large degree, have at least part of their surface interfacing with the connective tissue system. So if this is confusing, just think of the brick wall, and every cell requires at least part of its wall to be facing the mortar or the seawater, so to speak. Here's a little bit more of a detailed description. If you, on the lower left is just for your reference, but if you look at the artistic rendition up top, you'll see in the cube lots of different cells, and it looks like empty space. That empty space is actually, we're 60% water. So a lot of the water is inside of our cells in our body, but also a lot of the water is outside of the cells in our body. And then there is an actual, on the upper right, an actual photograph. So the interstitium or connective tissue is the terrain in which all immune processes and tissue repair take place. A healthy endocannabinoid system is essential for fertility. When the sperm and the egg meet, if the sperm has endocannabinoids and the egg does as well, and if the system is not working, they can't meet. Also, if you look, when fertilization happens, it's the beginning of life, it's the first cell on the upper left. But if you look from the 2-cell stage to the 4-cell stage, you see that cross in the middle there? That's the formation of the mortar. That's the formation of the connective tissue, so that as cell division occurs, this mortar, this is where the analogy kind of breaks down, but it literally is hardwired into the organism from the beginning. So you have, after about 4 days, this ball of cells. It's called a blastocyst. And what does it need to do? This is about connection. It needs to connect with the mom. So I'm going to start calling the embryologic terms. I might offend people, but I'm going to start calling it the word baby. But the baby needs to get contact with the uterus of the mom and establish blood supply. So if this implantation requires the endocannabinoid anandamide. Any Sanskrit scholars in the room? What does the word ananda mean? Bliss. So this was named by Raphael Chulam the bliss molecule because it was based off of THC, but if there's no anandamide, there's no baby. Also, neural stem cells are in connection with the ocean. It's called a neurogenic niche. So the neurostem cells are being told what to do by communication processes in this connective tissue matrix. And their proliferation, which means where they go and how they change, is shaped by external signaling via the endocannabinoid system. Also, another area of connection, breastfeeding. So lots of food themes with this. Human breast milk contains endocannabinoids. In humans, it helps the musculature and coordination of the suckling reflex in the babies. And if we block this pharmacologically in mice, the newborn pups stop breastfeeding and they die when we block the endocannabinoid system. Cannabinoids, both made by humans, endocannabinoids, and plants, coordinate intracellular biochemistry, intercellular communication, and all body sections, and all body systems without exception. And again, how does this happen? Is because of where it came from an evolutionary process. So, this is, I think I'm doing okay on time, so I'm going to ask the audience a question. What makes a body healthy? There's so many correct answers, but let's have a few. What makes a healthy body? Homeostasis, good. Let's just stick with that as a theme, because homeostasis helps the body. It's a dynamic equilibrium. What is it dynamic about? A healthy body is resilient against change. So homeostasis helps the organism deal with both environmental changes from the outside and the inside. In any period of quick change, you'll see instability of body structures on display. In classic histology, we observe these changes under the microscope. This is the human physiology is an open system. We have to maintain balance in the face of constant change. And one of the ways we do this is with things called biologic oscillators. It's a fancy word for something that keeps us in balance. Think of the thermostat of your house or your home. If it's too cold, not a problem we're having today, but if it's too cold, the thermostat will kick the heat on, and if it's too hot, air conditioning will turn on. So, despite wild variations in the external environment outside of the home in and of itself maintains proper, healthy temperatures. So every biologic oscillator or pacemaker cell we've looked at, the endocannabinoid system affects it. This includes circadian rhythms, day-night, wake-sleep cycles, rhythmic variations in blood pressure, peristalsis. I just learned from David Crow that peristalsis is incredibly important for the gut biome, as important as probiotics in his opinion. I thought that was fascinating. Endocannabinoid system is also involved with brain and heart rhythms. So I want to just talk about some of the protective aspects of this system. This comes from a study of mice at Hebrew University, and they, any chance we have a pointer? No? Okay, you'll see the artery there. That's the left anterior descending artery. You can take that and you can clamp it, and it blocks blood supply to the heart muscle. Guess what happens? The heart muscle dies. If we give the mice CBD at the time that we block the, thank you. If we give CBD at the time, if we give CBD before we block that artery, a very significantly large number of muscle cells survive what otherwise would have been, thank you, which otherwise would have been a terrible catastrophic event. So talk about adaptation to a change. And remember, as early life forms formed, one of the biggest things that non-photosynthesizing organisms had to do was deal with lack of oxygen. Another study, one of my favorite areas is the endocannabinoid system and neuroprotection. During conditions of nerve injury or axonal damage, the cannabinoid receptors are upregulated, so the body responds by increasing the number of receptors. And in glial cells glial cells are, if you ever are connective tissue support cells following inflammation or injury, the cannabinoid receptor populations elevate as much as 100 times. So we have this system. We typically think of a receptor system as being something that's very stable, but the endocannabinoid system is a response system. So the receptor populations are wildly varying at any particular point in time, which is why the dosing paradigm for cannabis is more based on individual approaches, and it's not just necessarily the difference between me and you, but the difference between me and me today versus me tonight versus me tomorrow. There's some good evidence on cannabis and MS, antispasmodic, anti-inflammatory, and antioxidant properties of CBD and THC not only help with symptoms, but we also think they might help with the progression. And we have some really interesting human studies coming out, not just on neurodegenerative disorders, but in other complex disease states as well. This is a study from the Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, and with cannabis and kids, the behavioral outbreaks were much improved, or very much improved, in over 60% of the patients. This is another, I love this study. It's a mouse study that looks at a mouse model of multiple sclerosis, MS. And what's really cool about this study is that the cannabinoids actually altered the gut flora, and we saw an increase in the amounts of friendly bacteria and a decrease in the more pro-inflammatory, unfriendly bacteria. And these authors in their conclusion, stated that it was this alteration in the gut microbiome that was largely responsible for some of these effects. Cannabinoid receptors in the nervous system represent the most dense receptors of all systems in the human brain. So if you think of a receptor as an information portal, a biologic information portal, we have more information portals on this system than any other receptor system in the human nervous system, more than the opiate receptors, more than nicotinic receptors, more than acetylcholine receptors. It's a massive, massive system, and it is constantly sensing and constantly adjusting and constantly changing. Here's just a little bit of a nice diagram. Cells can use molecules to talk with each other. So the little guys with the catcher's mitts out are collecting biochemical information packets, taking them inside of the cell and making changes. There are two major receptors in this system. There are others, but most importantly, CD1 and CD2. They're expressed differently in the body. It's an oversimplification, but CD1 receptors typically are involved in nerve-to-nerve communication, and typically CD2 is involved in immune communication. And CD1 is the receptor that THC will land on to give a head high. If it doesn't land on a CD1 receptor in the brain, it won't get you high. So echinacea, for example, lands on CD1 receptors, but it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So echinacea will be affecting the cannabinoid system in the periphery, but not in the brain. If it affected it in the brain, it might be something that would give us a head high, but it is not, just to be clear. CD1 is expressed in different parts of the brain. How much cannabis does one need to eat in order to cause an overdose death, the equivalent in humans? Any thoughts on that? 150 pounds of cannabis is required to be consumed to cause an overdose death in humans. It's actually an immense amount, especially if you only are 180 pounds like myself. That's a joke, I'm a little bit more than that. But because there are no or very few receptors in the brainstem, breathing, and heart centers, it is remarkably non-toxic in terms of stopping the heart or stopping the breathing. And in any of the peer-reviewed medical literature in any language, I'm not aware of one instance of death by toxicity. So I think that's a wonderful thing. Let's see what's next. So this system also supports a healthy stress response. If we define stress as a non-specific response of the body to any demand for change, I like that definition. We can measure baseline endocannabinoid tone. So by that I mean, think of the internet speed. The internet speed is the communication speed of the network. The baseline the speed of our body's internet can be affected by many types of change, and it is not the stress that causes the problem, but the improper adaptation to stress that causes difficulty. And a lot of us think of adaptability as a skill that we can practice, we talk our problems through, etc. I think that that's really good. We can also support our physiology and our adaptive capacity, physiologically speaking. In classic physiology, effects of stress are mitigated by the HPA axis. It stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. It's the interface between the nervous system and the hormone system. And the endocannabinoid system is a driving force for maintaining this adrenal axis function. When we block it at the CD1 receptor, we see immediately elevated levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Also, an intact and healthy ACS acts as a recovery system and limits this adrenal axis activity. We see lower levels of stress hormones. A supported ECS reduces this adrenal activity, and chronic stress leads to long-term disruption. So in the brain, I want to use the analogy of a car and just kind of hide in here, but this is kind of abstract, but what are some things that a car needs to work? Oil, what else? Gas, good, what else? Electricity, good, what else? Motor, does anyone want to put a motor in there? Okay, what else, what else? Tires, good. Water, good. What else, what's nobody saying? Yes, axles, yes, what else is nobody saying? Brakes, we need brakes, right? Because if it goes, that's good, but if it doesn't stop, that's bad. So the endocannabinoid system is the brakes of the nervous system. We have something called retrograde transmission, and typically when I was in medical school, they taught us that neurotransmission went only one way, because we weren't aware of this process at the time. But it's called retrograde transmission or retrograde inhibition, and it essentially allows nerve cells to talk to each other in the opposite direction. So if you're a network guy, I'm talking about computer networks, if you reverse the direction of information, you get a massive increase in the amount of biologic information that is able to be given at any one point in time. So via retro, and think of a seizure event, right? In a seizure event, all the nerve cells are screaming at each other, and nobody's listening. It's kind of like a reality TV show, right? Via retrograde transmission, the endocannabinoid system allows cells on the receiving end of a hyperactive event to call a timeout to other nerve cells by sending a signal backwards, upstream, to quiet the overstimulated neural circuits. So kind of like slowing it down. This is a much more detailed description or illustration, and you can see that the cannabinoids can affect this system here. Typically, most nerve information goes from the top to the bottom, but the endocannabinoids go backwards in a retrograde fashion. So a huge part of the nervous system is actually involved in the brakes. It's been said, physiologically speaking, that 70% of the brain exists to slow down the other 30%. And when we have a disruption in inhibitory mechanisms, we get what are called disinhibition disorders, disorders where the brakes aren't working. So anxiety, impulse behaviors, seizures are the brakes not working, and pain exacerbation, and more. So when, for example, when a pain signal is extreme or overwhelming, retrograde inhibition can use endocannabinoids to slow or reduce impulses coming from the site of the injury, thereby reducing the pain signal moving towards the cortex. So cannabinoids help balance the system that balances us. This is the homeostasis here. And CBD increases the anandamide, the bliss molecule, and others by inhibiting the enzyme that breaks it down, and thus it helps increase or helps that communication process, that speed of the internet. It also prevents overstimulation of CB1, CB2. When could that be a problem? Well, if you take too much THC, that can be a problem. It can be a problem in other areas. So CBD in conjunction with anxiety effects that can be caused by the THC. During a stressful event, remember, this is a response system. This is a biologic response system. The endocannabinoid system immediately responds by elevating the endocannabinoid levels to deal with the situation at hand. And this is another key, this second from the bottom is one of the keys to self-dosing. Self-reported stress ratings directly correlate with anandamide levels, with endocannabinoid levels. So part of what this medicine will teach patients is how do I listen to my body? And what kind of, like a lot of people are very not even aware that we actually live in a body. So it allows me to focus on how's my body during the day. Yeah, I kind of got up a little slow this morning, and I needed a second cup of coffee or whatever. So I'm having this. So it's really helpful as far as that way. And I think that's something that's a side benefit of the cannabinoids. I do want to talk a little bit about pain. Cannabinoid receptors are located throughout the nervous system, and they regulate pain perception. The endocannabinoid and cannabinoid receptors within tissues will shift in many pathologic states
underlying the health balancing role of the endocannabinoid system in inflammation. And this instantaneous production of the endocannabinoids underscores their role in the body's rapid response to injury and disease. By altering cell signaling in arthritis, for example, cannabinoids improve the communication process, and just like the heart muscle was protected, can also protect some of the cartilage and connective tissue components of the joints themselves. Elevated levels of the CB1 receptor are found in areas of the brain that regulate pain processing, and we can see those light up. And cannabinoids in a rat model also provide relief by triggering the release of endocannabinoids. So what happens when the internet of the body is not working well? We get these functional conditions, which is there's a neurologist, Ethan Russo. He is a cannabis genius, and he's very prolific in his writing. I would encourage you to read any and all of his papers. He coined the term clinical endocannabinoid deficiency syndrome, and there is a possibility of seeing these seemingly unrelated conditions like migraine headache, fibromyalgia, IBS, and other conditions alleviated by medical cannabis. It's not necessarily working on the pathways, but working on the network. I love this study because I noticed this with my patients, especially my pain patients, sick people. When they got better, they would all be saying a similar thing. They'd say, well, I lost my mojo, but I feel like I'm getting it back, or I lost my shine, and my shine is back now. This is from the journal Pain Medicine, Restored Self, a phenomenologic study of pain relief by cannabis. That's one way we know we're getting the dosage right, is when people start feeling like themselves again. And that's very rewarding in the clinical setting. I do want to talk about synergy because the botanicals are outperforming the single molecules, which there are a lot of advantages for that. Cannabis studies show that whole plant extracts demonstrate 2 to 4 times greater effect than the single molecules alone. And part of what is going on with this is simplified, but we have a plant extract, and if a molecule is hitting only one target, only one pathway, only going to get additive effect. So 2 times 1 is 2, 3 times 1 is 3, 5 times 1 is 5, 12 times 1 is 12. But when binding happens at multiple targets, we get an opportunity for synergistic effects that can result from additive value of the multiple effects. So 4 times 1 might be 4, but 4 times 3 is 12. That's a simplified model. We know that the dose response curve for CBD, for example, that's taken from a whole plant extract is linear, more linear, so that makes the dosing easier. When we look at isolated CBD, just the molecule, kind of like no dose is the caffeine derivative, we see a bell-shaped curve, which really limits its therapeutic efficacy. You guys have already had a terpene lecture yesterday, thank goodness, because I'm running out of time. But the cannabinoids, the cannabis plant is a natural pharmacy. It makes dozens of different cannabinoids molecules. The research has been limited, but everyone has been looked at has beneficial effect. It also makes hundreds of different types of terpene molecules. One of my favorites is a sesquiterpene beta-caryophyllene. Dr. James yesterday said his favorite is myrcene. So I'm excited. I want to learn a lot more about myrcene. Myrcene is a monoterpene, so structurally it's a little bit different. But cannabis also makes flavonoids, and flavonoid molecules are anti-inflammatory, and they can stimulate the immune system as well. There's a popular herbal product for flu called Sambucol, has some good studies behind it. It's a flavonoid-based anti-flu remedy. I believe it's USP, so I think you can buy this in drugstores. So cannabinoids and terpenes work well together. It's not, because this is a network effect, a lot of the times it's not so much the amounts that are important, but the ratios of the cannabinoids are sometimes we think might be more important actually than the amounts. And also the terpenes that it is engaging with. Now with cannabis, these terpenes can come from the cannabis plant as well, or they can come from a whole host of other plants. And you've been through all of these. Beta-caryophyllene in the center, if it's a pain condition or a neurodegenerative condition, I recommend looking for cannabis products high in beta-caryophyllene. And myrcene, which is Dr. James' favorite, is really good as a relaxant or a sleep aid. And again, these can be found in hundreds of other plants. How are we doing on time? We over? Oh, 15 minutes, we start Q&A. Great. Omega-3 essential fatty acids, which are the healthy fats. Salmon has omega-3, halibut, hemp seed does, chia seeds, flax seeds, soy. Omega-3s also, not only, omega-3s actually will increase the bioavailability of cannabinoids. So if you are taking a cannabis product, whether it's THC or hemp-based, you can take it with a lipid meal and you will get better absorption. And also the structural aspects of the lipids actually can help the internet of the body work better. They can increase the overall tone. Also very excitingly, when we take with healthy lipids, the digestive system will take those cannabinoids and deliver them right to the Peyer's patches, the immune congregation centers. So when we use these products, or we use the plant with healthy fat, we get a lot of residual benefit. Also, and very exciting to me, this is, I would recommend everybody, and forgive me because it's not large, but it's called Care and Feeding of the Endocannabinoid System, a systemic review of potential clinical interventions that upregulate the endocannabinoid system is a great read by McPartland. Cannabis treatment is also recommended in conjunction with lifestyle changes, including weight loss and dietary changes. It's not a surprise that this system, as a health response system, responds beneficially to these other approaches. Acupuncture improves the endocannabinoid system, spinal manipulation, other holistic therapies. There's actually a study about women and singing. I don't know why they didn't use men. Maybe we're too shy to sing. But how good do you feel when you're singing in the car and nobody's listening, right? I feel a lot better when nobody's listening than when somebody's listening. So this is really a special system because it is, the plant is teaching us, the plant has told us about this system. Our science has gone and elucidated all of these aspects to it, and we're finding, and it's teaching us so much. So things that we can do that we typically think of as healthy, we are soon, in my opinion, going to be able to measure that pharmacologically. So just to reiterate, that this is a treasure trove of a plant. It produces multiple beneficial molecules. And to summarize and recap, and we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A, which is good. This system is an evolutionarily preserved communication network resembling the internet of our body. It's a homeostatic communication system and is essential for proper development embryologically, as well as the maintenance of health. It responds instantly to biologic changes, including stress and pain. And cannabinoids and terpenes and the flavonoids can combine together to create synergistic and entourage effects. So it really brings in, talk about connection, it brings in, and it's not about cannabis, it's just named that, but it brings in this whole host of complementary and alternative modalities, and it gives us a system that we're going to be able to track and measure this. So just in conclusion, CBD and cannabinoids balance the system that balances us. So thank you so much for listening. And are there any questions? How do we do this? Okay, that's all right. Good question. So the first thing there, we don't know, but what we do know is, boy, do I love Haagen-Dazs is what we know with this. But what we know is we can look at BMI, which is we can look at the average weight of medical cannabis users, and they're actually less obese than the entire population. Part of what may be going on, we don't know what is going on as far as that goes, but we do see this phenomenon where folks are consuming massive amount of calories. Remember, not all cannabis is high THC, so I think that is, there are more types of cannabis than there are types of dogs, for example. So, but that's a classic. The classic, think of the skinny hippie, right? It's just they're eating a whole bunch of stuff and drinking the wine and eating the chocolate, and where does it go? It's the French paradox. I don't know the answer to that, but we do know that medical cannabis patients are not more overweight than the rest of the population. You had the first part with the pie charts, and then the first one. Let me find that.
Yeah, there looked like there was one pie, one little piece. There was nothing in there.
I might shut down the whole program here.
I can live with that.
Let's see.
Take your time. It's okay. 5 or 3.
Okay. Was there, so, and then there was another one at the end. Let's see that. It could be a different version of the same slide. Let's see here. Let's see. I used this slide twice, so let me find the other one.
It's okay.
Okay. All right. Next question. Sorry about that.
My question has to do with the use of the cannabis. Have you found that it's very good at regulating the nervous system and the homeostasis, so that it's only needed, whether for inflammation, pain, or anything else, for a certain amount of time, and then the regulation kicks in?
So these are good questions, and there are anti-inflammatory aspects of it, and we know that neuroinflammation is implicated in a lot of conditions, depression, etc. Does it affect that directly? I don't know that we can say that specifically. What we can say is that we know, for example, there's something called glutamate toxicity, which if you have a stroke, you have the oxygen supply is cut off, and then all of a sudden it opens up and all chaos reigns loose, because these nerve cells, which are very fragile and are starved for oxygen, all of a sudden kick on and they start pumping out glutamate, which is toxic. This happens in seizures as well. We know that cannabinoids are very effective at blocking that. Cannabinoids, if given within 4 hours of a stroke, can prevent glutamate toxicity. I believe they are now carrying them on ambulances in Israel. We're going to have cannabinoids on board. Paramedics are going to be administering them, whether they're pharmacologic derivatives or proper plant. I don't know, but that is coming. So it is a very powerful neuroprotectant that way. So as far as that goes, yes, there's another term that we use in herbalism called trophorestorism. So for example, oats are considered trophorestoric for the nervous system. So they're kind of a very deep, low-level nutritive support. I don't know if that is the case with cannabis. I don't know, and I would say also that perhaps maybe with hemp seed oil or hemp seed, you might see some benefits from neuroinflammation. The omega-3 oils in that, and again, we have with that tie-in for inflammatory control, it's the ratio of the omega-6s and the omega-3s that's as important as much as the amount. So this system is behaving a lot differently than others, and we don't know the answer to that.
So I guess my question is also more along the line of, does the use have to continue for years and years, or does the body?
I don't think it does. I don't think it does. I don't think anything should be used full term. Now, a caveat with that is for sleep. Any sleep aid and every sleep aid that we look at, if it helps sleep, when you take it away, there's going to be a response to that. So I don't ever think of it as being a good thing constantly, except for perhaps with the omega-3 oils. So we have to differentiate when we're talking about the plant, are we talking about the food source, are we talking about the cannabinoids from the flowers? I don't think that it, now, if it's a medical condition, if it's a pain condition, if it's a cancer patient, maybe. End of life, we can just have at it as far as that goes. So it's going to depend, but I would think for most folks, I don't see very many things as being beneficial constantly, because the way the biology will adapt to it. So again, with the way we dose it is we ask folks to take the lowest effective amount for them at the time. And again, when you listen to your body, I may not need that today, would be a good response. And also, there are different types of cannabis products. So maybe today I need a little more THC, but tomorrow I might use a product that has next to no THC in it. So it's not one thing. That's another difficult part of this.
And overall, does it have the ability to restore regulation and homeostasis?
We have indications to that, but I think that homeostasis is not really accurately defined. It's just this dynamic balance. Everywhere we look, we see it helping, but I don't think we really understand what all is going on right now. Yeah.
Just think there's great talk, so much information. I'm mulling on something that you mentioned very quickly. You were talking about virus patches.
Virus patches, okay.
Right, and I think you mentioned something about fast, and then it was my question. I think is so is it protective of that? And what I'm relating to.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Oh, I missed your comment about virus patches. You know, in the ilium, and whether or not it was protective and shielding. I think you mentioned something about fat. There was just so much information.
Oh,
what I'm relating back to is the question earlier about sugar, and knowing that emulsions are shielding over virus patches.
Yes. Okay. So
and inhibit the absorption of sugar, which could explain.
great. So some herbs will coat the digestive tract. Prickly pear will coat the digestive tract and prevent absorption of sugars. That's one way that it can help with diabetics. I don't know that cannabis does. I suspect that it doesn't because I don't see it as a demulcent herb. However, there is a cannabinoid, THCV, which has been showing excellent promise for metabolic syndrome, prediabetes, and blood sugar control, and also some studies on CBD controlling blood sugar. And the cannabinoids are very much involved in how the body utilizes energy, including in the mitochondria. So there is an intimate relationship with them with sugar utilization, but I don't see it working as a barrier to absorption. I could be wrong about that. I'm not familiar with any studies on that at all. But great question, and a testament to prickly pear, which when is ingested, can help regulate blood sugar. So there's more than one ways to the top of Mount Fuji, and we can utilize multiple actions to these together. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Sorry, I missed the very beginning of your lecture, and I don't know if you covered this, but what do you recommend is the best way to administer cannabis?
Great question. Very individual specific, but I also, for example, for pain, multiple mechanisms. I think, especially, let's say, for example, for knee pain, you can apply topical and you can take a product internally. Think of a Bluetooth speaker. You can control the volume of this, the music, both at your cell phone and at the speaker. When we apply something topically, their cannabinoid receptors are located throughout the skin and can help with pain perception that way, and we can utilize it centrally. Each system of administration has advantages and disadvantages. The advantage of an oral is that it is very long lasting. When it goes through first pass metabolism in the liver, you stick an alcohol group on the 11th carbon, and it stays in the bloodstream longer. So for sleep, I think oral is good. But if somebody is overly sensitive to THC, that hydroxyl group can cause a lot of problems, especially if they have too much. So it's a very classic example that probably a lot of us have heard of as somebody who's eaten too much. So pros and cons of the oral. In terms of inhalation, we don't ever talk about smoke, but one of the best things that inhalation is good for is it really allows patients to titrate. If you have too much from an inhalation, unless it's a dab, you just have to wait 30 minutes. If it's a dab, you have to wait maybe an hour. And I don't ever recommend, very few patients, I think I've recommended dabbing to like 3 patients. So pros and cons of an inhalation. Also a con of an inhalation is we don't know what it's doing to the lung tissue. There are some irritant factors that can be involved. Topicals are wonderful if there's pain. There is patch technology being developed. We know, for example, in guinea pigs, we can get plasma concentration of cannabinoids up to way higher than DOI levels in humans. But typically for pain, the topicals only last a couple hours, so not really good for getting through the night. So each particular mode of administration has its advantages and has its disadvantages, and we can also combine them. For example, someone with a migraine headache, you get something, people will get visual disturbances, and if you need something right away, taking an oral product is not going to give you enough time. So that might be time to have an inhalation, and then follow that up with an oral product that can last a little bit longer. So, great question. And I wish I had more time. It always seems like there's not enough. It's been wonderful speaking with you guys, and thank you so very much.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Thank you. Very interesting subject. I notice you have your email address on a lot of these slides.